The Code of Jewish Law states that before we make a blessing over bread, we should dip the bread in salt. Because it seems that in those days, bread was very bland. And it's a mitzvah to make a blessing over tastier food. So in order to make the bread tastier, we dip it in salt to increase the honor of the blessing that we're making it over tastier food. The Code of Jewish Law continues, therefore, if your bread is made out of fine flour, which seems that it's tasty enough, or otherwise tasty because it has in it salt already, or other ingredients, which that would apply to our bread, we do not need to dip the bread in salt prior to making the blessing. Nevertheless, concludes the Code of Jewish Law, we should still place salt on the table prior to the meal before we make the blessing over the bread, for the following reason. The Talmud explains, based on a verse in Ezekiel, that our table that we eat on is compared to the altar in the temple. Just like the altar in the temple, which we offered sacrifices, atoned for our sins, so also the table we eat on and invite guests and feed the needy atones for our sins. So since our table is compared to an altar, so the food we consume on the table is compared to the sacrifice that were consumed on the altar in the temple. Now the Torah says that on the sacrifices we need to put salt. It actually says in the Torah and the text of the Bible, we should not abolish this covenant of salt on our sacrifices. The Torah calls it a covenant of salt. Why is salt a covenant? There are many reasons. One reason is, just like salt is a preservative that never spoils or decays, this is a perfect metaphor for our everlasting and eternal covenant we Jewish people have with God that never spoils and decays. So the Code of Jewish Law continues and says, that's why we need to put the salt on the table before we make the blessing on the bread. Because we know that before we eat bread, we need to wash our hands, and we're not allowed to talk between the washing of our hands and the blessing on the bread. So in that time, and especially if we're waiting for other people to come to the table, we are silent and we are bereft of any mitzvot. And the prosecuting angel, called the Satan, might see our shortcomings. So we put the salt on the table that the covenant of the salt, which is the eternal covenant that we have with Hashem, should protect over us. Now, based on this reason, we don't need to dip the bread in the salt in bread that we eat today that is already tasty. However, according to Kabbalah, we need to dip the bread into salt. And actually, the manner of the dipping is twofold. Firstly, we dip the bread into the salt, not sprinkle the salt on the bread. And secondly, we dip the bread into salt 3 times. For the following reason. We know that bread is the staple of life, which, according to Kabbalah, symbolizes divine kindness. Salt is bitter, which symbolizes divine sternness and strictness and judgment. We also know that the Hebrew word for bread is lechem, and the Hebrew word for salt is melach, which actually has the exact same 3 letters, lamed, chet, and mem, lamed, and chet. We dip the bread into salt, not vice versa, because you don't want to put severity over kindness. On the contrary, we want to overpower kindness over the severity. So we dip the bread into the salt that the kindness should sweeten the severity. The reason why we dip 3 times is because every Hebrew word has a numerical value. So the Hebrew word for lechem and melach, bread and salt, is 78. When you divide it in 3, it's 26, which that's the numerical value of God's essential name. So by dipping the bread into salt 3 times, we are trying to elicit the 3 names of God symbolized in the bread, the God of kindness, to sweeten the name of God symbolized in the salt of severity. That God should bless us with only sweetness and not severity. Thank you.